Welcome to Stars Podcast. Through self-defense, mixed martial arts, nutrition, family, and all things in between, we share our journey of how we hack our mind and body to get the maximum return out of each day. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the journey. This episode is brought to you by FuzzyMonkeyCoffee.com. You may think you are drinking good coffee, but are you really? Fuzzy Monkey Coffee Company challenges you to buy a bag of our specialty fresh roasted coffee with an exclusive Stars Podcast discount. Visit FuzzyMonkeyCoffee.com and enter STARS POD15 at checkout to get 15% off any bag of coffee or single serve pods. Our light, medium, and dark roasts from all over the world will suit anyone's taste buds. Visit www.fuzzymonkeycoffee.com and enter STARS POD15 at checkout to get 15% off any bag of coffee or single serve pods. My personal favorite is Squirrel Monkey. It's a little bit of a lighter roast and is perfect for the mornings. All right, welcome back, guys. This is Ron Jordan coming at you from Rocinante Studios out of Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. Coming at you with another special guest. We have Lisa Marzilli. Is that how you pronounce it, Marzilli?
Yes.
All right. We have Lisa Marzilli in here, and she is, I don't even know where to start. So she came, I've talked to her several different times, and every single time she listens to what I have to say, listens to everybody's input, and then formulates this amazing response. She comes from Eastern medicine. She comes from Western medicine. She has spent a lot of time at yoga retreats and being a yoga instructor, as well as having a scientific background in her formal education. And she is a national speaker for addiction medicine, clinical pharmacist, and now a member of Stars Podcast family. Lisa Marzilli, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here, and I've really enjoyed watching your podcasts. And when we first talked about this, I'm like, geez, I know that the premise of, the wellness part, but I guess I had watched all the Gary V and the NFTs and such. So I'm not going to lie to you, I was intimidated.
Oh my goodness. I'm almost just as intimidated, if I'm being honest, because I feel like you are such a wealth of information about mental health in general. It's something that we talk about on the podcast quite a bit. A lot of people, no matter who you are, you have a brain, you have thoughts, and we also have goals that we want to accomplish. We have bills that need paid. We have kids that need taken care of. There are a lot of push and pull in our daily lives, and we've talked before, and this is something that we can navigate towards and go where we need to, but we don't necessarily know how to quiet that mind to be as productive as we possibly can be. But before we get there, why don't we start where you have some of your formal training from, and then where you went from scientific into that yoga community and bridging that gap. If we could start there.
So my formal undergraduate, I went to pharmacy school, which at the time was a 5-year program. Today it's 6 years and people get a doctorate. So I graduated in 89, and in 1997, I went back for my doctorate of pharmacy. So it was actually another 3 years. Hindsight's 2020. If I were to, look back and say I should have just gone to medical school, but that's not what I did. And that's like a waste of energy. And so fast forward, I worked in traditional pharmacy for about 22 years. And one of my customers locally in Rhode Island had opened up a urine drug testing laboratory that serviced addiction facilities and pain clinics throughout the country. And so my initial hire was to, in 2009, was to be part of sort of like a call center, because it's not as easy as you think to interpret the disposition of drug in urine. So we didn't do any workplace testing. So it was like something new to learn. And inside of a month, there were all these catastrophic emergencies with their like real keynote speakers. And my boss said to me, hey, we really need you to do this. And we need you to go to North Carolina and present at an
Within
addiction
1 month.
school. Yes. And so at that time in 2009, I think it was like K2 and spice, so they're called synthetic cannabinoids, were really coming into the fold. So the topic was somewhat nebulous. So it was less about like pure scientific research and more about this phenomena. Today, fast forward, it's illicit fentanyl and synthetic opioids. But yeah, it was horrifying because I don't like to be center stage. I don't, as I said to you, even this, I was nervous. But since then, I've tried to press myself to do an experiment with things that are outside my wheelhouse.
Absolutely. I can appreciate that. So whenever you went and you did that presentation, what were some of the things that did you practice it a bunch of times before you actually went through with it? Because I know a lot of people, they will struggle with being in front of an audience or being on video, and needing to perform, if you will. And
Yes.
maybe some just what you did even early on, and maybe not even knowing that you were doing it at the time, but looking back, you're like, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, first of all, putting the presentation together, and I practiced it a lot because the bigger part, it wasn't the knowledge piece, it was just, I'd never done this. And I think myself, like many, I did have a fear of public speaking, and I don't like to be in front of the camera, and I don't do selfies. And, I think also it's like a generational thing. I didn't grow up with any of it, but was thrown into it when I went back to school in 97. So I was like a fish out of water. And I think the nerves ended up helping me. And through time, I had the privilege to learn from legends in the field of addiction medicine and had the privilege to learn neurobiology from them. So I'm not a neurobiologist,
Yeah.
but I teach to it.
But you learned from folks that were legends in the industry, and
Yeah.
maybe you can elaborate on that too, because think that's an important piece of your story, is getting that knowledge from those individuals that have so much to give, and sort of entrusted you with that knowledge because they shared it with you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was very fortunate, this gentleman, his name is Dr. Darrell Anaba. He's also a doctorate of pharmacy, and he and his colleague, Dr. David Smith, opened the first non-for-profit Haight-Ashbury clinic in San Francisco. And this was during the Summer of Love, when people that suffered mental illness and addiction and used heroin were looked at as criminals. And not that it's completely changed today, because believe me, the stigma is still so thick. But the misunderstanding of like, this is a choice, this is a choice. And I think Dr. Naba took a liking to me because I had the yoga piece, and he came from a Buddhist background, and he actually has a company. I don't know if they're still doing it. It's called CNS Productions, where they try to reach the masses to teach like what is happening in the brain, right? So we do all kinds of things to keep our bodies in shape. But the truth of the matter is, what do we do to keep our minds in shape? So learning that foundation from him, and I think I was just such an eager student and so thirsty for knowledge. And I was lucky because the company kind of pushed me out as a keynote speaker. And I'm like, how am I a keynote speaker? Like,
I've
I'm
been here for a
horrified
month.
to even be here, right? But I think the thing that I would get over my nerves, because I was so excited to teach, but to also learn. Because now picture, I had been in healthcare for 22 years, but my direct contact in this field was only limited to the people I interacted with at the pharmacy or at the hospital that suffered from addiction. It just didn't seem a far stretch, because diseases of the brain, whether it's mental illness or addiction, we don't ever get to see them, right? You have a broken leg, we take an x-ray, I see your leg is broken, we put a cast on it, and that's okay. Nobody's judged for that. So there's not many medicine specialties that, imaging of the organ isn't seen. So the level of misunderstanding, the level of stigma, it's just so pervasive. And so one of the things, and I still haven't worked up the courage to do it, I have been, sharing knowledge with people from addiction facilities or at conferences. And my mission is to really reach people and families. And I've done that on one offs, not for money, just volunteer. And I've done so much of it that as this Gary V and V Friends progressed, and I kept hearing about content, if I can get the courage, what I would like to do is, because TikTok has big reach, figure out a way to put snippets out there, because I think the people in most need are families that don't understand. If they don't understand what's happening, for the record, only about 10% of the population will get addicted to a substance, and you can fill in the blank. And that includes behaviors like gambling and gaming addictions and different things. They call those process addictions. But I think the piece that folks don't understand is once you get down that road of using a substance or a particular behavior, your brain is actually functionally changed. And I guess the simplest way I can state this, it's like the front brain gets shut off and the primitive brain is loud, loud, loud. And so they get to a point where the substance or behavior doesn't serve them. Their life is becoming decimated, but they don't have the motivation, executive functioning, etc., to make those behavior changes. And so, without a pictorial, I guess you could say the front brain, it's like lights out. It's a very primitive way to live. But what we see as a symptom is bad behavior, lying, cheating, stealing. So it gets judged. And people think, well, it was a choice. Yes, the first exposure is a choice, but when it takes hold, it actually isn't. And people seek the behavior or drug. They don't even get high off it or feel good off it. It's to prevent withdrawal or to escape emotions. So this was like a new world to me.
Yeah, absolutely. What does the substance do inside of the brain that turns off that frontal and then makes the primitive brain so loud?
So we have what's called a communication network. It's called the default mode network. And I think everyone can relate. Like when our mind is wandering or when we have that self-critical voice, that piece of our brain becomes very overactive. But as humans, we are pleasure-seeking creatures, period, whether it's food, sex, shelter. And so we lay down these memories for survival. And what happens, the old brain, which is the emotional brain, and the thinking brain, there's a pathway called the rewards network, reward cascade. And so there's a communication between the two. And so, I guess a simple example would be, so if we had a meal, let's call it $2 worth of dopamine, because dopamine is the big chemical we talk about when we talk about pleasure. And so we are hardwired to, one, remember different things that help us survive. If we talk primitive times, it's like finding food, finding shelter, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So even though our brains have evolved, certain portions have not. And so through the course of addiction, when dopamine is getting pumped out over and over, you get what's called downregulation, where you don't respond. So feelings of joy and feelings of connection, it's like all blunted, and people are unable to feel joy. So the primitive brain is overactive as the lights are going out in our executive functioning brain. And so what happens is, I use the terminology of a shriveled peach. Think of the brain as it's shriveled up and it's not functioning properly. So some habits can be good, so you can kind of relate it to habit forming. So if you do something over and over and over again, neural pathways get connected.
So whenever you end up, becoming addicted, we'll say, to whatever the case is, we'll call it gaming, just because I know a lot of folks that listen to this are gamers, and
Yeah.
We spend hours upon hours on that game, or name that game, whatever. So the primitive brain ends up saying, part of the survival is, the shelter, the food, and all of that. But how is survival? How is that brain saying that gaming is is good and keeps us going back to it? Is that because the dopamine is part of the primitive brain? It's
Yeah,
just releasing the
yes,
dopamine.
yes. So think of it as a gas and brake. There's a go switch and a stop switch. So whether it's
Mhm.
gaming or a substance, if you get, say, a bolus of dopamine and you feel so great, over time you burn out those pathways and you get a dysregulation. What, the technical word is homeostasis, like a set point.
Mhm.
Whether, you could equate it to your weight. Our bodies travel back to a set point. So what happens is when there's too much of a hit of dopamine, there starts to be down regulation of the receptors. So it doesn't feel as good, you know?
So you do
So
more.
let's do more. You need more, you want more. And, it also becomes sort of an escape. But what happens over time, as time progresses, you don't get that same feeling. So you need more and more and more and more. And then you kind of get out of balance. And when you get to that stage, it's very hard to have any self reflection because remember, your thinking brain isn't functioning properly.
Right.
So,
You're end up in a situation where your brain is sort of flooded with this dopamine that's behaving in a way that is very primitive, and the executor of your brain that usually says, "Hey, calm down. Like, no, we can't do that all the time." The
exactly. It's
It's
like the
flooded
foot
and that
is up.
person's like underwater trying to come back up for air and he can't.
Yeah, think of it as driving a car without brakes. It's
Mm.
going to run wild. Um, but the saddest part is when the brain's changes, when the neurochemistry changes that drastically. The simplest way I can say it is like a broken brain. But these individuals are no longer able to feel real pleasure
So
and real joy.
whenever you ask the person, or not ask the person, but whenever you go through treatment modalities and they don't feel the joy of doing anything other than that thing that's actually not joyful anymore, but that's what they do to try and feel joy. Like where do you start at that point as far as like trying to teach them different ways to find that joy, or do we go back to something else? I guess I'm asking you, where do we go from that point? Once we recognize that we don't want to do that behavior anymore, where do we go from there?
So let me just preface the answer by saying, think of this as a temperature thermometer. Like, I like this, I want this, I need this. When you get to the state of I need this, there's so much dysregulation that when years have passed and the brain has changed, very often you're going to need an assist. So whether it's a loved one, and that gets tough because think of it like a husband and wife, right? If something is so out of sync, then you have all the layers of human interaction that become less than healthy. So whether, if people are at this I need state, so this isn't everybody, this isn't all behaviors. It's when it's interfering with jobs, relationships, responsibilities, and it all hones down to one thing, whether it's the drug or the behavior. Your life is kind of a shit show, for lack of a better term. It's like your life is basically upside down.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to have self reflection. So whether it's, not everybody needs to go to treatment facilities. Some people do because it's a contained and controlled environment. And I'm going to go back to that shriveled up peach. It can plump back up to life, but it's like adapting new behaviors, laying down new neural pathways. This is why it takes time for any type of recovery. And we're all going to trip and stumble and fall. But if you can continue to use a toolbox for whatever, if it's a substance or a behavior, it's
Mhm.
going to take time to climb back out. So nothing's an on and off switch. And with most behaviors or substances, it's going to take multiple times to try because neurobiologically, it's what we call an extinction phenomena. If the volume is turned all the way up and it's screaming loud, it's going to take time to dial that down. But it's like a vulnerability you got to watch out for. And, I hear a lot of folks, for the blessed ones that never get addicted to anything, again, really far down, like I need this to survive sort of thing. The misconception that the person suffering can change this on their own, um, it's near impossible. There are some people for sure that are able to go to, say, like an AA or an NA or a similar group for gaming or sex addiction or porn addiction. And there are the 12-step programs that kind of go off the same premise. There are actually, it can be overlaid over brain recovery, like the neurobiological changes that occur. But in most of these types of, if you don't go into formal treatment, the reason to have community and the reason to have group is exactly that, for reflection, for support. And there's a gentleman out of England that he does a lot of TED Talks. His name is Johanna Hari, and he has a family. Actually, many of them have passed from heroin overdose or synthetic opioid overdose. And I love his commentary. He says, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connectivity, human connection. We die without it. We're going to die without it. And I guess the simplest way that, like my Eastern philosophy self, any type of movement, any type of exercise, this becomes so important, because if we are adding substance in or adding behavior in, and our dopamine isn't working properly, it needs to come back online. And so what exercise and movement does, I know some people have an aversion to the word exercise, is it helps our feel-good chemicals come back online. So whether that's endorphins, enkephalins, anandamides, which is where cannabis works through those systems, anytime if we are putting something in, it down regulates our body processes. So recovery, big staples in recovery, and it's becoming huge, whether it's meditation or yoga or even what we eat, how we feed our brain becomes critically important for the healing process. So it has a lot to do with lifestyle.
It's
but
like
the
you're
connection,
like a personal trainer for the brain.
well,
I mean,
I,
honestly, like I think of what everything you're saying is exactly what a personal trainer or a coach would say to you when you're trying to build muscle or get faster or jump higher. Like it is
yeah,
like the parallel. You're a personal trainer for the brain. Like it's not like, because I know therapy's got this big whatever about it, and I don't know. This is something that I'll chew on for a little
yeah.
bit, but I like that idea.
No, I mean that's a great idea, because I'm trying to think of, and again, it's been so hard for me to like get on TikTok. And I know like Gary Vee says, just do it. And
You could be the first
I know I
TikTok
need
personal
to.
trainer for the brain.
Yeah, I mean, because really it's like community and connectivity, but also laying down new habits. So some of that, if you don't really understand the underpinnings of all your feel good hormones, our body has tons of them. You have sex, you shoot off endorphins and dopamine. But when, just to give you a comparator, like sex or food, let's say that's $100. If you introduce a behavior or substance, that's like $2,000. And so the brain becomes so flooded. So I heard a neuroscientist describe it like this, like we need like little drips of dopamine throughout our day and throughout every day and throughout the week, rather than this big bang of a bolus, drug or behavior, that ends up causing all this dysregulation. That the symptom is a behavior that just doesn't serve the individual or people in their world well. So I'm like a epic bleeding heart. My 98-year-old father always says, he's so cynical. He'll always say, no reward for you here, Lee, only upstairs. And I'm like, shit, Dad. I mean, that's some encouragement, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know, you're just born that way. So helping people and doing things like, I almost do it to like a fault where, just this past couple of weeks, I was saying to someone in the community that like you do get drained. So it's like finding that balance.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah. There's only so much you can pour out. You can be
yes,
overflowed to a point, but you do have to put back in. And But just to say exactly to that point, and I think it's a good segue, is like that self-love and self-regulation that you do need to have is sort of shut off when you're in that capacity of just trying to find the next bolus of adrenaline or whatever that is, that feel good juice. Um, so where the focus has been lately, no, I don't want to say lately, maybe like the last 5 years, there's been more of a focus on that inner reflection, that and meditation has been a big buzzword. And then with the coronavirus and everything being locked down, it's forced people into self-reflection because there's nothing else going on. You're just with yourself all the time. So
Yeah.
can you explain what you have seen as a result from COVID, and sort of how it all plays in?
So that's a double-edged sword. So if you have the capacity to do the self-reflection, say without a therapist, or you have a good relationship that you can mirror one another. So there's mirror neurons that wire together, fire together. That's a saying.
Hmm.
Um, there's two sides. People that are in relatively good health. Yes, COVID has brought families together, and fathers that have traveled that can't travel, that are home and reconnecting. So it's been a huge plus to so many. Not to be doomsical, but I would say the other side of that people that suffer, or people already on the margins of society, have suffered greatly. And anxiety, depression. So when that isn't available to a person to really engage self-reflection because they're so deep in a hole, it then becomes very difficult to employ it by yourself. So there have been a lot of online support groups, AA, NA, gaming addiction, sex addiction. But, like anything else, like a massive catastrophe like the pandemic, sadly, people on the margins of society have inordinately suffered more. So even when it comes to cases of COVID, people of color, people are less privileged, people that live in communities were more highly afflicted. And the sad part of it is, because I participate in a vaccine initiative, is they're the ones that are most afraid. They're the ones that are most susceptible to misinformation and get caught up in the fear of the media. And I know that I kind of deviated from the question of like, what do you do? Some people in seclusion of COVID fared very well if they didn't go into it with whether it was a little depression or a little anxiety, and could use that opportunity of quiet to do good. But there are so many people that weren't in that space.
Well,
And
I
I do
think that's
think,
just it, is a lot of people don't have the skills necessary to get to do those types of deep dives into their own self-reflection, or even have the time to do that.
yes,
Because a lot of people on the margins, I say a lot of people all the time, I got to stop doing that. The
I know
pe-
I use colloquials too. It's tough.
people on the margins are very busy. They're very busy being worker bees, and they don't have time to reflect. They don't have time to study. They don't have time to meditate. And that ends up becoming a situation for them where they don't have the skills necessary when things do get hard, how to react, how to behave, other than the primitive brain.
Yeah. Their lives are very, I use it, and it may be a gross analogy, like people on the margins operate in a more Darwinian way, right? If they don't have housing, or they don't have food, or they don't have a job, or those that have a job that have to work 3 jobs to hit the poverty line. So yeah, it's very true. But when I've had the opportunity, not people that are in the despairs of any type of substance use disorder because they need more time to get there, but as their brain starts to recover, I mean, a simple one that I myself invoke, it's called the Calm app. And sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 3 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes. So people think meditating is, hey, I'm Siddhartha, I'm going to go out in the woods. Like, no, it's just becoming the watcher of your brain, right? It's becoming the watcher. So anytime you can step away and just look inward, that's meditating. When our minds are wandering, that's the opposite of meditating. That's when we get caught up in that voice saying, you know, you didn't work hard enough, or you didn't do this, so you're a loser. That's that self-referential voice. And when we don't put our focus on one thing, that becomes loud. But if we try to focus on one thing, something as simple as breath, it takes you to a whole other state. And the really cool thing I learned through this process, and I just had this, you know, as you said, this background in yoga and yoga philosophy and a scientist, as I got more into it, like the Dalai Lama and a bunch of neuroscientists out west have been doing studies since 1992. It just hasn't gained traction. It's gaining more. And the buzzword they use is mindfulness, but they're employing it, you know, not just in addiction recovery, but say in elementary schools to help kids control their behaviors, to learn how to quiet themselves. And believe it or not, and you know, it's too deep to get into here, but the skills of attention, the skills of happiness, and you know, virtues of human goodness can be learned. They actually can be learned, and it doesn't take that long. So they took a group of I'll call them Olympic meditators, so Buddhist monks from Tibet, and they took a control group. And so the control group had never done any type of breath work or meditation, and they popped them in what's called a functional MRI that takes a picture of their brain. And in 2 short weeks of just guided breath work, they were able to quiet down that internal voice.
Amazing.
But like anything else, you said, it's practice, 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 practice. And we don't value that. Like, I'm going to keep my body in shape. We need to keep our brains in shape, because this organ operates everything else in our body. And I think our culture isn't in a place to really wrap their arms around that yet. I think we're getting there. I absolutely do, because you see it employed more, like workplaces that have corporate lunches that they bring somebody in. People need to see hard data to say this is worthy. Because I can tell you, even in my own experience corporately, when I said, hey, how about a topic of mindfulness and yoga and the neuroscience of brain recovery? And of course, you know, the C-suite was like, you know, Lisa's out to lunch, because I've got these 2 sides of my experience and brain working together. And over the course of, I would say, 10 years, it was the most requested lecture.
So where can the listeners find more about you? Are you having anything right now? I know you're on LinkedIn, you're in the Discord. Where else are you?
Well, I'm just kind of needing to get that all started. I mean, I've been in the professional realm, but I want to get on TikTok. I just started Instagram. I don't have a website, so I have a lot of work to do.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I do want to step out of the corporate world for sure. I've had enough.
All right. Sounds good, Lisa. Thank you so much. As always, guys.
Have a great vacation.
Oh, we will. We're going to have a blast. Enjoy the journey, everybody. Take care. Thank you so much for sticking around until the very end. If you wouldn't mind, please leave us a review and rate us wherever you have downloaded this podcast from. If you found any value in it, please put that in your comment. We'd love to hear back from you. Also, if you haven't done this yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please follow us on Instagram, stars_podcast, and definitely get in our Discord. That's where all things are happening. So the VIP access tokens are happening there. We are also launching information about new projects in that Discord. So again, follow the Discord, follow the YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram. Those are the places that we're going to be dropping the most information. Thank you guys so much. Again, leave us a review if you can. If not, we'll see you next time. And as always, enjoy the journey.